on the Master Chemistry YouTube channel. This lecture is going to be all about difference between orbit and orbitals. There are two terms in chemistry that you need to know about: orbit and orbital. An orbital is an area on an atom that has electrons that can be lost or gained by chemical reactions, whereas orbits are paths of movement around a central object. Why it is important to know the difference between orbit and orbital in chemistry. It is important to know the difference between orbit and orbital, as chemistry is a multifaceted subject that is constantly evolving, and the language used to describe it will change as well. The first difference between orbit and orbitals is that orbitals are regions where an electron is most likely. Orbitals also contain the highest probability of finding electrons, whereas orbits do not have a high possibility of having their electron present in them. The second difference between orbit and orbitals is that there are different types of orbital shapes for every atom depending on its position in the periodic table. There are four types of orbitals: the s orbital, p orbital, d orbital and f orbital. The third difference between orbit and orbitals is that orbitals are not visible, whereas orbits are. The fourth difference between orbit and orbitals is that electrons are present in orbitals as opposed to orbits. The fifth difference between orbit and orbitals is that electrons' orbitals are different from each other. In general, the number of s and p orbitals equals the number of elements in a group. The sixth difference between orbit and orbitals is that orbitals are three-dimensional shapes of electron density while orbitals only exist in two dimensions. Orbitals can be defined as mathematical equations that define the amount and location of electrons surrounding an atom or molecule, whereas orbit is where they're likely to be found at any given time. Orbitals have been described by scientists as probability clouds because they are constantly changing. The eighth difference between orbit and orbitals is that atoms exist in three different states, or energy levels: ground state, excited state and ionized state. Orbitals can be defined as mathematical equations which define the amount of electrons surrounding an atom or molecule, whereas orbital refers to where they're likely to be found at any given time. The ninth difference between orbit and orbitals is the amount of energy required to remove an electron. That's the end of today's lecture. Subscribe our channel for more videos. You can also read the article by visiting the link in description.